Start out the conversation with the dear Paul Rieckhoff, and then when Rachel comes, she will. Yes, I know. She will. Yeah, I know. She will leap up and join the party. So, for those of you that don't know Paul Rieckhoff, that's a shame. You're going to get to know a really fine human. He is an Iraq War vet who has dedicated his time, energy, and resources to fighting for the rights of people who defend our country. What could be better than that, really? I can't think. He's funny, he's smart, he's engaging, he's a patriot. Please welcome Paul Rieckhoff to the stage! We need fancy theme music. Hi!
Thank you.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Awesome. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about what happened. There's some stuff that happened today that was pretty insane, and 4 women suicide bombers in Iraq after this sort of peace had happened in northern Iraq, in the Kurdish region, and then in Baghdad. I guess, I don't know why I took it, I was so freaked out that it was 4 women, and I don't know why I was, but I just was. Maybe because it was just so in your face that 4 suicide bombers really did this, and I think 57 people died. Where are we at? Is there really any kind of legitimate progress when that happens?
There have been some security gains, but I think that they've quickly been framed by people like John McCain as monumental, earth-shattering successes and on the road toward victory, or whatever the hell other words he uses. I think the reality is that it's very fragile, and the surge, among other things, has created some degree of military stability. There has been a drop in the number of attacks, the number of deaths, but it's not just a surge that did that. There are a number of other factors that have contributed to it. Part of it is basically ethnic cleansing of neighborhoods within Baghdad. Al-Sadr has kept his forces basically on a giant pause button. There are other complicating factors that have contributed to the stability in Iraq. It's not just the surge. But I think McCain and others have been running out in front saying, look at what the surge did, it calmed everything. And I think what I hear from folks over there, and what I always am concerned about, is that it's very fragile. Even if you have a downtick in the violence, if you have a pause in the violence, it can reemerge at any point. And I think that's what you see with these suicide bombers. That's what you can see with, the political progress there has been some, but the Kurds also walked out on the parliament last week, and it's, gridlocked it again. So it's a long road, and it's going to be up and it's going to go down. It's going to generally be a downward slope. And I don't think anybody's going to say that this was a great idea now because the surge has worked, except for John McCain, it appears.
Well, and the fact that the Kurds walked out was probably the most underreported story of the month, I would say, when it comes to the war. It's the talking points, and I know that the American media is very caught up in the election, but things like that matter. And the thing that I get so confused about is that people are going to probably vote a lot on how they feel about the war and the progress of the war and the next president that gets in and how he's going to end the war. Yet there's no reporting on the war. And I guess, how do we thrust our opinions upon mainstream media to tell them we want to know about the war?
Change the channel and go where they are covering the war. I think places like PBS and BBC and other places, independent media, continue to cover the war. But plenty of folks in the media tell me that the country's reached Iraq saturation. They're tired of hearing it. And even if there is a new development, people are kind of gridlocked in their views, so they don't really get pushed out of that. I think there has been an increased amount of coverage on Afghanistan, which is a good thing. A lot of our folks call it Forgotistan because they feel like nobody was paying attention for a long time. But I think when you go back to the argument about the surge, even let's say best case scenario, we all agreed that the surge worked. The question is, at what cost? What have we given up in Afghanistan to be able to do what we're doing in Iraq? What have we given up in the wildfire progress, or at the southern border of the United States, or wherever else we're trying to send our National Guard in order to...
Come on.
Come on, Rachel. Rachel Maddow.
I turned it off. I'm sorry. Hi. I'm sorry to interrupt. No. Sorry. Hi. Paul was talking about McCain. It was really depressing.
About McSaint?
Yeah.
Sorry, keep
Look,
going.
presto
Ladies and
changeo,
gentlemen,
right out of
this is the
TV.
Rachel Maddow.
Carry on where you were.
Thank you for joining our party.
Sorry to be late. It was the MSNBC's fault.
Well, you probably had to wipe all that off your face, too.
Exactly. I forgot, right under here, I forgot I still have a little beige.
No, it's good.
Yeah, yeah.
How come you didn't keep the smoky eyes for me? I feel a little rejected. I love to watch Rachel's smoky eyes on the news. I'm like, wow, Rachel's got smoky eyes. Who does her makeup?
Well, in 15 minutes, I'll have raccoon eyes, which is a different form of smoky, as the makeup that was up here slides down. That happens at about this time every night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of ladies have that in the morning.
Yeah.
They've had a good night.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to ask you about Afghanistan a little bit, because as somebody who is sort of freaked out by war in general.
Good.
Yeah.
I am too.
No, I know. No. But you're sort of, you guys are studied. And I am an observer, and then learned from Rachel. Like, I literally learned from Rachel, and then I would just have jokes. I didn't know fucking anything. So, when we talk about Afghanistan, we talk about we need to move over to Afghanistan, and we need to focus on Afghanistan. My gut, as a human, says, they're a country that's sovereign. And so we've got to go over there in the middle of a country that has a government and be fighting terrorism, a concept. It just seems like, yeah, we'll go there and yeah, it's necessary, but it does seem like a slippery slope of we're going to another country and we're going in there and they already have a government and an army, and do you know what I mean? It just kind of creeps me out that we're just doing another kind of here we go in there, and are they inviting us, and what's the deal? Paul?
Go ahead.
Rachel? I will just,
You got to make up for being late. So
I do. So I had to run with this one. I feel like the question that we owe it to the people who are actually going to do the fighting in uniform, the question we owe it to them to ask is, are we asking them to do something that military force is the best tool to achieve? So is there a goal that we are trying to achieve by using our troops that is the kind of goal that troops achieve? Because, I mean, there's a lot to be said for supporting our military and respecting the job that they do, but the thing that we can do the most, I think, to respect the military is by making sure that they don't have missions that either aren't doable or that aren't worthy of them.
When you ask that question of Afghanistan, is the answer yes? Or is the answer I don't know?
I want to know more what our troops are supposed to do there.
Right. And I guess that's part of what I feel like. And just because we were so burned, and Paul, you were one of the guys that were sent to a thing that nobody explained to you with no end game and no pre-game. It was like a fucking crazy train of, what was that football league that was awful?
XFL?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Awful?
Like that.
I don't know.
It felt like that.
Yeah, I think that in Afghanistan, from the folks that I talked to, it does feel like more of a traditional military mission. But at the same time, you hear Barack Obama talking about complementing it with 2 additional brigades, shifting pieces away from Iraq over to Afghanistan. And I always use the Risk game as an analogy. Think about the board game Risk, where you've got a limited number of pieces and you have to think about how you're going to arrange them on the great board in the sky. Well, we do have a finite amount of people and a finite amount of resources that we never really amped up after 9/11. So military commanders and political leaders have got to think about how they use the resources we have. So by doubling down on the surge, we've given up something in Afghanistan, and that's why you've seen an increase in violence. It's one of the reasons why you've seen an increase in violence. So I think there is political support, and there is support within the military to shift some of the resources away from Iraq over to Afghanistan. I think there's also a political calculation there, because you're not just saying, oh, we're going to bring them back home and they're all going to go back to doing what they do. You're shifting them away from one fight over to another, which seems to be almost universally popular. You've got NATO support. You've got much higher degrees of support within the American public. And everybody supports generally a drawdown in Iraq. So
how does the Afghani people feel about it?
How does what?
How do the Afghani people feel about it?
A lot worse than they used to. Used to be that 2 years ago, 70% of the Afghan people, 70-something%, thought that U.S. continued military involvement in Afghanistan was a good idea. Now it's down into the 40s.
Yeah. And
I mean, honestly, Afghanistan has been at war or in some form of occupation for a really long time.
Right.
They can't remember a time when they haven't been.